Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Timeless Steel Garage. This time it's all about the A340E transmission, that's 2JZ swap. So more specifically, this transmission is an A3040LE 2000 and up. These engine transmissions have come in almost everything Toyota's made, from like the 85, even Jeeps, all the way up till late 2000s, I think. They have like 4 different valve bodies, all kinds of different types inside. This one more specifically is the 8934 valve body, or version 4. And this is in a completely electric controlled valve body. As far as shifting, it doesn't use a kickdown cable like the older ones used. It uses 2 accumulators, a lockout solenoid, and 2 shift solenoids. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna get you caught up to where I got to get the valve body on the bench. And so right here, these photos that are about to pop up. Okay, and we're gonna go through what I've seen so far and what I'm gonna do. Now, anytime you buy a used transmission, you have no idea what you're getting. You gotta drop the pan, and this was definitely one of those cases where I dropped the pan and there was a whole bunch of water in the pan. You can see here just sludge, and the pan was beat up. You get these transmissions from junkyards, used, people store them outside. They get water in them. This transmission, the oil pan dipstick was bent, probably from when they pulled the transmission at the junkyard. I got this transmission from a guy who bought one of those old drivetrain swaps that were common on eBay to get the 2JZ GTEs. Came over from Japan on a pallet, transmission bolted up. He used the motor, he didn't use the transmission. Motor runs great. He never tried to use the transmission, and then I bought the transmission from him. So the good news is, like, once I got inside the transmission, it looks pretty good in there, but there's really no way of knowing that the transmission's okay until I get it all back together and fire that girl up and see what she does. Now, what I do know is I don't want any of the electronic gobbledygook control of this transmission at all. I want manual control. And after seeing the valve body and how nasty it was, I had to pull it anyway to clean it. It had water, it was bad. So I had to pull the valve body regardless. While I did that, I went ahead and bought a Transgo reprogramming kit. This is part number 340-HD2. And this is a reprogramming kit with gear command. What that basically means is it gives you the option to make it so that the transmission will not shift out of first unless you shift it out of first. So if you put it in first, it'll hit red line and won't do anything. You don't have to do it that way, but this gives you the option. So that's the gear command. Fits 340, 341, 343, Jeep, 85 and on. So that's that. Also got a brand new oil pan here, brand new filter, brand new rear main seal, our rear seal for the transmission. Rad Design Products LLC made me this sweet shifter, and he's a big name in off-roading for guys that use these Toyota transmissions. And basically, I'm gonna wire this with that shift kit, and the way I'm running this trans, I'm gonna have no ECU control of the trans, and I'm gonna shift it like an off-road buggy or a drag car. So I'm gonna manually select each gear. So it's gonna be like driving a manual transmission with no clutch, basically. This unit's pretty slick. So basically you select first, second, third. Once you're in third, you push the button on the side, goes to fourth. If you wanna come back out of fourth, you push the button again, it goes to third. And regardless of what gear you're in, you can go neutral or park. And he sends these with all kinds of adjustable gates, so you can customize this however you want. You can do reverse pattern, forward pattern. It's an awesome unit. And this transmission requires electric signals sent to these solenoids to shift, and they're built right into this shifter assembly. It's got little sensors inside that tell when this thing moves. As far as I know, he's the only guy that's really doing anything like this other than Winners. And his setup is way more badass. So check it out if you're interested in one of these. Again, that's Rad Design Products LLC, and his website is www.raddesignproducts.com. So the intent of this episode is to install that Transgo shift kit into this valve body, and of making this transmission a manual control transmission with no ECU involvement. So now that we got all that gobbledygook out of the way, I'm going to take you over to the car and I'm going to show you what it looks like currently show you the intercooler mount that I set up that I've finished since you guys were here the last time, and then we're gonna get right into it. Full disclosure, never done a shift kit on an A340, never messed with these transmissions. I'm gonna follow the instructions just like anybody else would. I'm gonna document my progress. Hopefully it works. Here we go. All right, so here is where we're at currently. And you can see that when you pull this valve body off, you're gonna drop a spring here, spring here, spring here with plungers, a spring here, and a drain back valve here. So you gotta be ready for all that stuff to fall. It's really hard to mess up when you put it all back together because it's only gonna go back together one way, but you take note of it, take pictures. I took a bunch of pictures, they'll be in this video. And then here is my intercooler setup complete. So if you remember, the factory setup had welded unibody style mounts right here. I had to cut those out, had to cut that out, and had to shave the front cross member here, bolt through, and then these stainless lower radiator and intercooler supports came from Diesel Pump UK. Sorry, it took me a second. But it's pretty sweet. The intercooler sits right here. I had to trim the bumper, and then once the radiator's in, you'll only be able to see the intercooler from the front. And honestly, as low as this car sits and the intercooler being black, it's really not going to stand out very much. I just went ahead and painted it. This is not a sway bar. I misspoke in the last video. This is just a welded in lower radiator support that now ties into this. And I honestly think this setup is actually stronger than factory. And here's the sway bar right here. So that's where we're at currently. Here we go. It's all about the transmission. So we've got factory Aisin whatever this is, Aisin trans fluid, ATF-0T4, Transgo shift kit, new pan, new filter, new rear seal, gaskets, and then that Rad Design Products shifter. Okay. So as you can see here, this valve body is sitting. Imagine if I just dropped it out of the transmission and then brought it over to the bench. That's how we're sitting right now. So this is top up. This is the side that faces the transmission. And you can see those things that weren't in the trans that I said fall out. They go here. So you got the three main ones, and then this little guy that sits over here. And then you've got this drain back valve for the, I think it keeps the trans cooler lines from draining back. Sits up and goes down on that hole right there. So what I've done is, the Transgo shift kit, actually the instructions show the bolts and the letters of where they go. Some guys go crazy with this and put them in cardboard and all kinds of stuff. I just organized the bolts by size and laid them out. So I've got oil pan bolts, valve body bolts, and springs, and then solenoids. So there's your shift 1 solenoid, shifter number 2 solenoid, your 2 pressure accumulators that are controlled by the ECU, and then your lockout solenoid. You can test these. I've already done that. You literally just put a power wire to the spade and then ground out the body to a negative, and you'll hear them click. If they don't click and if it's not a solid click, they're bad. A lot of these transmissions I do know get junked because of these, and these are all replaceable. Then the valve body itself, upper half and the lower half, and then it's got a steel plate with a bunch of holes in it to control pressures, and with a gasket on the top and a gasket on the bottom. One thing that kind of stinks about this Transgo kit that I've already figured out is they do not provide valve body gaskets. And these valve body gaskets there's so many different variants of this trans. I've ordered a couple different sets and I'm hoping one of them's right. There's 4 different versions of this valve body. So it is what it is. You're gonna have to source your gaskets. The good news, if you're doing this to a trans that came out of a car that you have the VIN to, it's real easy. Go to your Toyota dealer, give them your VIN, and tell them you need valve body gaskets. So, kind of funny, you open this big box, and it's got a bunch of instructions, and this is all that's really in it. They do provide the drill bits for the kit and a sticker for your toolbox, which the sticker is really the most important part. That's what you're getting for your money. And then it's just a bunch of springs. They do give you the main instructions for removing and installing the assembled valve body, and then they give you instructions for the different types. The big thing is there's basically 2 that use a TV cable for the throttle, and then there's 2 that are electric. All right, so back to the instructions. This shows you which valve bodies there are And this is what we are, 4B. So you've got a shift 1, shift 2 solenoid, accumulator solenoid, lock-up solenoids. And it's pretty obvious just based off the shape of your shifter solenoids and whether you have a TV cable or not. So you can see here for Type 4, they can come with a TV cable, but it says valve body may have EPC solenoid or a cam for TV cable. Kit works with both. So mine has the solenoid version, not the TV cable version, but I know I'm a 4B just based off of the solenoid layout and the relief valve that's shown in the picture. So, first steps, remove the valve body. You guys can figure that out yourself. And it's pretty simple. So we're gonna skip to Type 4B instructions. Start doing it. Nothing really crazy to disassemble here, but there's stuff that likes to fall out of this thing. So the instructions talk about removing all the bolts from the top and flipping it over, holding the plate underneath against the top half, because if you don't, then all the check balls that are on the top half are going to fall out. Now there is screws holding it together, so that shouldn't happen, but it depends on what model you have. So what I'm going to do, because there are these little solenoids right here that like to slide and pop out, is I'm going to flip it this way so that it's lower half, it's still oriented the right way, and it's flipped it upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these bolts out and we'll go from there. There are people that get really caught up about what bolts go where. I can say it's fairly obvious what bolts go where by the thickness of the casting, and the instructions give you a general idea. And when you're done, all the bolts should hang about the same level underneath. So if none of that stuff's happening, move bolts around until it does. But you do you. I really have to not screw this up. Now I was able to find some literature online showing where the check balls go for this valve body. So it wouldn't be the complete end of the world, but I really don't want to have to figure out where they all go. Okay, so I'm holding this thing. I'm gonna flip it upside down. There we go. Oh yeah, you can see why I had to take this thing apart regardless. I mean, I've already cleaned it up significantly, but yeah. Yeah, this is a later model where they got smart and they added little screws here so you couldn't screw it up. No pun intended. On this 2000 and up version 4 valve body, they have screws here in the valve body plate so that you can't lose the check balls, so that makes it nice. And then here you can see the lower half, this labyrinth, if you remember that movie, of just where all the pressures and the magical things that are happening that somebody way smarter than me did. The valve body plate separated here. So just keep all your screws and nuts and bolts organized, clean everything, and I'm going to organize everything before I even start with the instructions on the drilling and the check ball removal. What I read ahead on the shift kit instructions, it actually has you remove some check balls and not reinstall them. It has you drill out some orifices. Let me say that a third time. Orifices. Here we go. There we go. There are the plates coming off. Sick! So you can see it's just a paper gasket on the top, a paper gasket on the bottom. I'm going to keep this thing the same orientation and just slide it over here to some cardboard. And yeah, there, now you can see the check balls that I had talked about earlier. Balls, lots of balls. Here we go. See these little guys in here? These are all rubber in this model, but from the research that I did, but they can be made out of plastic, metal, but I mean, you can imagine there's so many of them. Imagine if you dropped this thing and they all went somewhere, you'd be in a world of hurt. I'm sure there are guys that rebuild these things all the time that know exactly where they go, but so yeah, for now, I'm gonna clean all this stuff, and you could tell by the different colors of the fluid in here that there's been water contamination and other stuff, so we are going to make this valve body great again. The transmission, it looks so nice up there that I'm really hoping that the trans works good and is fine. But worst case Ontario, if it doesn't, then we'll already have a modified valve body that we can steal out of it to put in a different transmission, and I can use this thing as a core to send off if I have to. Maybe have it rebuilt or... But full disclosure, I only paid like $250 for this transmission, so it was worth the risk. And you know, that's the way it goes with used parts. When I originally started this build, my intent was a budget build. I don't think I can get away with calling this a budget build anymore. If you start adding up the money, $250 for the transmission. I think the shifter assembly, which is amazing, was about $300, and then I think the Transgo shift kit was $130, and then the new pan was like $100. New filter was like another $60 with gasket and everything. So you can see, even when you're trying to save money, it adds up. I don't know what that all adds up to you. I don't math. All right, step one, it says install new lockup bushing valve and retainers. So you can see there's a lock pin there, and we have to slide this guy out. That was kind of a pain. I had to use a pick to put a little pressure on it, and then I popped the retainer out. I'll put that little guy right there. And we should be able to just pop this dude out of there now. Some picks to just get this thing moving here. And here she comes. Now we got to find the replacement parts inside the kit. Thing is full of crud, so I don't like that one bit. Hopefully this is already an assembled piece in that shift kit. All right, so we've already found our first victim of that water. And that's a good thing we're doing this shift kit, because this lockup bushing valve and retainer assembly, what the instructions are calling, was completely rusted, frozen. And I went through and checked the rest of the valves inside the valve body, and they're all moving just fine. So good news is it comes with a new piston. We only have to reuse one piece in here and the spring. So once I get this apart, we can clean it up and reassemble it and make sure it moves freely before we put it back in. So look at that. Look at that rust and corrosion on that valve. I mean, that would have been a no-go. You know what I'm saying? So this is how this thing installed inside of here. Now there's a little bit, there's a spring that goes behind that. And then there's another piece in here that's got to come out. How it came apart right there. This whole assembly slid out of there. So we have the valve, spring, a rod, and a retainer. All right, so it looks like we're not going to use this big piece anymore, and we're not going to use this little guy here. It wants us to use this new piece instead of that big long one, the new shaft here. And then the spring goes on the front of that, and then this plunger. So it's going to look like this, and it's going to slide back in, obviously. All right, so if you see here on the left, that whole assembly and this pin I'm not using. This came in the shift kit, and this came in the shift kit. This spring and this plunger are original. This plunger, I went ahead and sanded off the rust. The right answer is I should replace this. I'm not going to. I cleaned the corrosion off it. I'm going to lube it up, and I'm going to put it back in. With some fresh ATF in there, it'll keep it from continuing to rust, and it should keep it moving. So that's what we're going to do. All right, here's the deal. All of the different valve body instructions show the same procedure in the same valve body. But however, see, this lockout solenoid and retainer, lockup bushing valve and retainer, I'm sorry, you can see is not the same diameter as the bore on this valve body. It does not fit right, at least for that part. So I'm not too concerned about the lockup being faster, harder, whatever. But I am concerned about putting a valve in there. It's not the right diameter, and it's not going to work to begin with. So I'm not going to put that shift kit lockup bushing valve and retainer in there. I just rebuilt the stock one, slid it back in there, and put that retaining pin back. Now the next thing this calls for is to remove a whole bunch of check balls. Alright, so right now I'm just looking to make sure check balls are where it wants them. Yes, 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 yes again, yes again. Okay, so basically it looks like it wants me to get rid of the check balls on this whole back row here. May have balls in these locations, but do not install check balls in these locations even if it had them. So mine has 5 in the locations it doesn't want, so I'm going to take them out. And they're little rubber balls, so I'm just using a pick to remove them. Okay, so I've done the valve check balls. The next thing it wants us to do is the separator plate. It wants us to drill a 0.055 inch hole for the 3 to 4 shift. And then it gives options for truck or hot rod on the 1 to 2 and the 2 to 3. I'm going to go with truck because I have no idea how good this transmission is. And I've read a lot about people complaining the truck shifts hard as it is. I don't want to go hot rod. So truck for the 1 to 2 shifts 0.076, and for the 2 to 3 shift it's 0.062. And it comes with the drill bits. And it has a little diagram over here. So 0.76 or 5/64, 0.62 or 1/16, and so that's next. Hey, welcome back. So I talked to Transgo tech support and they said to do exactly what I already did and maintain the original lockout valve and retainer assembly. And the tech I talked to hadn't dealt with this specific issue, so this must be like a later model valve body that they're not used to dealing with. But he said install the rest of the shift kit, just leave the lockout valve and retainer assembly stock. And he said just don't accelerate hard with lockout on. And lockout will only be available in 3rd or 4th gear, I believe. He couldn't remember off the top of his head if this thing would do it in 2nd, but basically the way this valve body works is until you physically select 3rd gear, it doesn't send transmission fluid back to the lockout valve. So he said just don't accelerate hard in lockout, give the torque converter time to lock up. But I wasn't planning on doing that anyway. I mean, lockout really in my case I'll be using on the highway. I think Toyota says 3rd and 4th gear above 45, but don't quote me on that. Anyhow, I sent my wife to AutoZone on the way back from the gym to pick up some gasket remover because the gasket material on this valve body plate is like rock hard. And the guy at AutoZone said to her, "Oh, there's no such thing as gasket remover." Which is exactly why I don't go to AutoZone. Anyhow, so we're gonna pick up where we left off. I'm gonna go ahead and drill this thing with the gasket stuff still on it, and then I'm gonna throw it in the parts washer and let it soak, and then we'll move on with the rest of the shift kit. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna drill is the 3 to 4 shift, and I've got it marked with a pick here. These drill bits are not labeled, but it comes with exactly 5, and the chart starts at the skinniest one and goes all the way up to the top. So we can deduce that the smallest drill bit is the 0.055, which is what it wants for the 3 to 4 shift. And the hole that we're drilling is already super small, so we're not taking out much material. I'm gonna double check to make sure I got the right one here. And I do in fact have the right one. All right, that's simple. So we're gonna go to the 2 to 3 shift. So the 2 to 3 shift wants the 0.62 drill bit, which will be the next size up. And we're looking for the right hole here. So that's this guy. And we want the truck setting, which is 0.62. Here we go. We're taking like the tiniest amount of material out of here. It's kind of funny. So the next one's going to be the 1 to 2 shift on the truck setting, 0.76 or the 5/64 drill bit, which is the third one. This little guy right here. This one we're taking quite a bit of material out of. Yep, that's it. That's the right one. So this is the 1 to 2 shift. All right. So that's that. That's the valve body pressure plate modification. And so that's, you know, 3 to 4 shift, 2 to 3 shift, 1 to 2 shift. Again, I went with the truck setting on each one, and the 3 to 4 shift regardless is a 0.055 inch. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this valve body plate in the parts washer and just let it soak to try to loosen up some of this valve gasket material, and then we'll go on to the next step. So now we're moving on to the lower valve body. So step 1, it says discard original PR spring and thin washer, install new orange PR spring and new thick washer. So we're going to remove this guy back here, and we're going to change that washer and that spring and reuse everything else. Okay, this magnet has a special V-shaped, this valve is a V-shaped retainer. So we got to make sure we put that in the right way. Now we're going to pull the valve out. Don't want to scratch anything up in here. Alright, there she is. Let's go ahead and disassemble this to make sure that it looks like what it's supposed to. Okay, there's a spring. Kind of help this girl out because she wants to fall out of the bore. There we go. Yep, and this is another example of why we're doing this, because a little bit of water damage. Got some corrosion on here, and we got some some gooky gobbledygook. So let's lay this thing out like how it came out, and then we'll readdress the instructions. So obviously I'm gonna have to clean this little valve here. So that's how she came out, and then this washer goes right there. Alright, so here's how this all goes back together. You got the valve assembly with the little push rod, a shaft. Here's the old spring and washer. It's blue and thin. We're going to an orange spring and a thick washer. I've cleaned this all up. I'm going to lube it all up with ATF and put it back in there. You can see on the back of this, that V, that's where this special lock pin that has a V shaped like an L has to go into. So, alright, get this thing lubed up with some ATF here. It'd be nice if I had gloves that actually fit. Alright, so that goes on there. Let's go ahead and dip this spring in some lube. So that's going to go like that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide this part in first because it was kind of a pain to get out. There we go. Got to make sure that the washer doesn't fall off, and you'll know when it's fully seated. Now we need to look at the back side here and make sure that washer's still on the shaft. Yeah, see, it wants to fall off. Okay. Now I'm going to feed the orange spring in. There we go. That'll keep pressure on that washer. And now I'm going to assemble this little guy. Put him back together. First thing is this little pin that's got to go in here. Hopefully not too much of a pain. Use my little pick. These picks are mandatory on this job for sure, because especially if you have big hands. Now we're going to lube up this little piston with some ATF. Put him back in there. Alright, so that part is lubed up, reassembled. Now I'm going to slide it in with that little V facing up so that I can put the lock retainer back in it. Yeah, that spring is significantly stronger. Turn this back around. Okay, and you can see on the back side of this, and I'll show you with the camera, the little V that I'm talking about. See that little V channel? That's what I'm talking about. Was for the PR valve. Now we're going to move on to, now it has a step here, step 2 for hot rods only. You pull the this piston out and you replace the spring with a blue spring. I'm not going to do that, so we're going to skip that. And then here's the whole reason I bought this kit. Step 3, optional low hold feature, keeps trans from upshifting in manual first. Remove and discard original 1-2 shift valve, which is this. These are known to get beat up and fail. Insert the 0.25-inch steel ball into the new 1-2 shift valve. Place assembly loom on the end of the pin and insert new 1-2 valve installed on the body. So we're going to replace this valve and that ball and stick it all back together. Get my instructions the right way. It's going to be this little guy right here. So here we go. Put some pressure on the end of it. There's the retainer. A magnet. You also definitely need a magnet. It was worth putting this shift kit in just to clean all these valves out, that's for sure. And this 1-2 shift on these transmissions, from the research I've done, takes a pretty good beating. So this shift kit comes with a stronger shaft. And I'm gonna have to mess with this to get it out because it's a little gummed up and it's not wanting to cooperate. Alright, yep, there's the first piece. Get rid of this so I don't get confused by it. Yeah. These all needed to be removed and cleaned. So this is 2 birds with 1 stone. On cleaning up this valve body and upgrading it at the same time. Come on now, cooperate. So these valve bodies are precision machined. So these shafts, they get, as you try to pull them out, they get caught up on the next ridge of wherever you're pulling them from. So you just got to keep working them back and forth with a magnet. That's what I'm doing here, and it seems to be working. This is why when you have transmission work done, it's expensive. There we go. Man, what a pain. That was the hardest one yet to get out. Here she comes. Alright, so this is the original on the right. It's solid, doesn't have any holes in it. This one has a hole on it. It's made out of a harder metal, but if you look, they're the same length. And now it has a ball in it and a shaft. So now I'm just going to reassemble, put this stuff back in there. I want that to be fully seated because I don't want that ball to fall out. Alright, so that appears to be fully seated. Now I'm going to take the spring, lubricate it, put the spring back in, make sure it's around the outside of the pin, and here's the plug. Plug's going back in, and the retainer pin. Drop that little guy back in there. Alright, so apparently that's the biggest benefit of this kit from what I read, is it really firms up that 1-2 shift. And now it'll stay in first gear unless I want it to come out of first gear, which for the performance application, that's what I want. I think that's all of the valve body modifications that we need to make. The valve body I can put back together. The only thing I screwed up on this that you guys got to pay attention to is I did lose a retainer. Luckily I didn't use one that's in this kit, so I'm going to trim that retainer to put it in there, but just be real careful and make sure your retainers are installed. So the next thing it wants us to do, I haven't put that valve body together yet, but I'm going to get the accumulators ready so that it's all ready once it's done. So there's type A, type B accumulators. Basically the easy answer is if it has a short spring on one side, then that's a type B accumulator. So for the 4th gear, which is this one, alright, so for this 4th one, it wants us to reuse this original blue spring and then add a blue spring inside of it. For 3rd gear, it wants us to reuse the large spring, but then put a red gear inside of it. And for 2nd gear, it wants us to use the plain with a long spacer. So for now, I'm going to take off all the small end springs because we're not using those, and it pretty much shows you to use diagonal cutters and rip those springs out of there. So I went ahead and ripped all these little springs out the back of these accumulators, and it maintained the little C-clips in there. I'm going to leave those. So now we're going to start with 4th gear accumulator. So it says reuse original but add blue spring. There comes with several packs of these in the kit, but it wants you to use a long spacer pack if you're doing the Type B accumulators. So since these are Type B accumulators, that's what I'm going to do. And it has a plain spring, long brass spacer, it looks like it's made out of brass, and a thin blue spring and a thin red spring. So the first step is it wants us to take 4th gear, and there's pictures of these accumulators, you can't really screw it up. So it says to reuse the original, so I'm going to reuse the original. Here's a blue spring, I'm going to add that in the center, so 4th gear is good. It says for 3rd gear, reuse original large spring. We're going to get rid of this internal spring here, and we're going to use a red internal spring. So if you can't tell, we're beefing up the springs in these accumulators. And then plain 2nd gear accumulator, it wants us to remove the spring that's installed, install this plain spring along with a long brass spacer. So that's it. The accumulators are modified. It says to do nothing with the no change to this other spring and accumulator that I showed you earlier in the video, and drain back valve, it says to leave stock as well. So that is, for all intents and purposes, that's the shift kit. Now it's just putting all this stuff back together. The pressure plate soaking in a cat box with some 3M adhesive and tar remover. Everything over here is ready to go. I did figure out that I ordered the wrong transmission filter, so I'll get another one of those. But really no point in videoing the rest of this because it's just reverse of removal. So if you get to this point, you can put it back in. But since we're waiting on a transmission filter, my neighbor Dennis came down and helped me out. We got treadstone manifold is installed. We got a BSI 45mm wastegate. It is a piston and spring style, not a diaphragm style. A lot of guys have had good luck with these things, so I'm running that. We got the precision turbo mounted and clocked. Got the pressure side vertical, and I've got a precision style drain flange, if you can see that there. So that's how the motor's going to look, with the exception of a beauty cover I got going on top, the coils, the height, all that kind of stuff. That's what she's going to look like. So anyways, we have gotten a lot done. All I have left to do is put the valve body in the trans, put the pan back in, and then mount that shifter. But that'll all be in a future episode of Time with Steel Garage. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.